She stood at the edge of the grave, knees buckling under her own grief and guilt. She didn't wear black like everyone else, she wore ivory like she always did when she wanted the world to pity her. When our eyes met, the tremble in her lips betrayed the very thing she swore she'd never feel: regret. She mouthed it, barely, like a whispered prayer. Wait. And once, I would have thrown everything away for that single word, just to believe she meant it. But this time, I didn't come alone. The hand holding mine wasn't desperate, it was quiet, steady, the kind of hand that waits because it chooses to. And as the choir sang her father's name, I let go of everything that once made me kneel for her. I didn't come to say goodbye to the dead, I came to show the living who had already buried me long ago. She used to laugh like the world was hers. Not politely, not demurely, not the way rich girls are taught in the rooms with glass tables and champagne flutes. No, her laughter was wild and full and alive, like it had teeth, like it could cut through sadness and drag me out of the weight I didn't even know I was carrying. Her arms would fly back, her eyes squeezed shut as if even she couldn't contain how good it felt. I'd watch her from across the couch or from the other side of the ramen pot we boiled in my shared dorm kitchen. God, I used to think it was music. The kind that didn't need speakers. Just her and air and whatever joke I cracked that she didn't actually think was funny. I thought that was love. Maybe, in some strange way, it was. But what I didn't understand then was that sometimes people laugh loudest when they're trying to drown something out. Sometimes joy is a performance, and sometimes you fall for the sound without knowing there's a silence waiting beneath it. When we met, I was the guy fixing copy machines outside her business class. Ink on my hands, discount suit that didn't quite fit across the shoulders. I smelled like toner and instant coffee and ambition that hadn't been crushed yet. She wore a blazer I later Googled just to understand how a piece of cloth could cost more than my semester's rent. She looked at me like I wasn't a glitch in her day, like I was interesting. Do you know how rare that is? Her name was Celeste, and even her name sounded expensive. But when she spoke to me that day, asked if I had a tissue for her jammed printer finger, I saw something odd in her. Not pity, not boredom, curiosity. You always look like you're solving a riddle, she'd said, grinning, sucking her paper-cut thumb. And I was. Her. The first night we kissed, we weren't supposed to. She'd come to my dorm after a fight with her father. She'd curled hers. Elf into my too small bed like she belonged there, no makeup, just a hoodie and mascara smudges and this look that made my heart feel like it was learning to walk again. I don't want to go back tonight, she said, voice small. Can I stay? I nodded, I couldn't speak. She laughed, arms back, eyes closed. That laugh, that foundation. And I thought, God help me, I will build you a house with this sound. We didn't sleep. Not really. We talked and whispered and she cried a little when she thought I wasn't listening. I touched her hair once, just once. She didn't stop me. In the morning, she made me coffee with too much sugar and kissed my neck and said, "You're my calm in the chaos." No one had ever called me anything that kind before. We didn't fall in love in restaurants or on European balconies or at summer villas like her friends did. We fell in love over cracked mugs and second-hand furniture. Between my part-time shifts and her skipped therapy sessions. Over my thrift store records and her father's threats to cut her off if she didn't stop slumming with someone who can't even afford a car. We built a world between her penthouse and my dorm room floor. She'd bring champagne in her purse and drink it from my ramen bowls. I'd walk miles just to pick up the brand of sour candy she liked when she was too tired to smile. We made plans, big ones, New York, Florence, that mountain town in Japan with the Fox Shrine. She'd write, I'd design, she'd laugh, I'd build, but I think, I was always building alone. She was just standing close enough to look like she had a hammer in her hand. I still remember the night I realized I'd never be king in the castle I made. We were at her gala, a glittering storm of pearls and tailored lies. I wore the only suit I owned. She wore midnight blue, her bare back framed like a painting. She introduced me to her father's friends as a really close friend from school. Friend. She laughed, loud and hollow, when I spilled a little wine on my tie. Not the laugh I knew, Not the one from my floor, my arms, our shared silence. This one was sharp, too rehearsed, theatrical, and beside her, laughing too, was him. Luca, polished, powerful, reeking of money and the knowledge that it could make people forget their values. He touched her back, not possessive, familiar, like he'd done it before, like he'd been allowed. And when she turned toward me with her too bright smile and her too light tone, I heard it, her laugh, the one I used to know, now filtered through someone else's air. It didn't reach her eyes. I asked her that night, quietly, in the taxi. Is he something I should worry about? She looked out the window for so long, I thought she wouldn't answer. Then, he's safe. What does that mean? It means, he doesn't ask for things I can't give. She didn't say love, she didn't say no. And that's when I realized, I wasn't the calm anymore, I was the storm she'd weathered and outgrown. The last night she stayed at my place, it rained, a real storm, lightning against the dorm windows, my blanket wrapped around her as she shivered from something she wouldn't name. She didn't talk much, just curled into me like muscle memory. I hate the way they look at me, she whispered. Like I'm my father's shadow. You're not, I said. But she didn't believe me, she wanted to, but her silence had already begun to drown her. I held her tighter, and she let me, but in the morning, her laughter was gone, and so was she. The truth is, I kept waiting for that laugh to come back. Even as it changed, grew distant, filtered through brunches I wasn't invited to. Phone calls she didn't return, months that passed with fewer I miss yous, and more, I'm just tired. I blamed her father, her pressure, the world that told her someone like me was a risk. But deep down, I knew, you don't lose someone all at once, you lose them in echoes. And the loudest echo of all was her laughter. No longer mine, no longer real. The day I saw her and Luca at that rooftop bar, the one we always said we'd visit together, I didn't confront her. I just stood across the street, watched her throw her head back, eyes closed, arms back, and laugh, like she used to. But this time, I didn't hear music, just the sound of a door closing I never realized I'd walked through. It didn't happen all at once, that's the cruel thing about fading, it's quiet. Like a photograph losing color in sunlight, like a name slowly disappearing from lips that used to whisper it in the dark. The first time she forgot to tag me, I brushed it off. A rooftop dinner post, captioned, "Perfect night with perfect people," everyone tagged, except me. I laughed to myself, even commented, "Did I vanish already?" with a winking emoji. She never replied. The post stayed up, the silence stayed louder. A week later, she hosted a small dinner. "Just close friends," she had said, breathless over the phone. I offered to bring wine, my usual brand, cheap, dry, but with a story behind it. She said not to bother, they had it covered. I wasn't asked for the address. The next morning, I saw the group photo. Everyone smiling under string lights, her leaning into him, Luca. He was always in the background before, now, he was center frame, one hand casually resting on her lower back, the other lifting a glass like he already owned the night. She wore the dress I bought her, cream-colored satin, the one she called, too romantic for crowds. I had never even seen her wear it. I told myself I was overreacting, that love, real love, isn't built on social media etiquette. So I stayed. Stayed when she texted at 3 a.m. because her father yelled again. Stayed when she got sick and whispered, "I don't want anyone else here." I drove an hour with soup and medicine I couldn't afford and a playlist I made just to make her feel calm. She let me in, let me hold her hair as she vomited, let me clean her floor and heat her water bottle and sit on the edge of her bed while she drifted into fevered sleep. And yet, when she introduced me to her gallery partner the next week, she said, "This is John, a friend from school, he helped me through a weird time." Helped, like I was a therapist she forgot to pay, like I was temporary, like I wasn't still Holden. Gee, the pieces. The worst part. I kept writing her letters, pages of ink-stained, trembling thoughts, not emails, not texts, letters. Because there's something about holding words in your hands. I thought maybe if she felt the paper, she'd feel me, feel what I was too afraid to say out loud. I slipped them under her door, never signed them, just wrote her name at the top like a prayer. But she never mentioned them. One day, I saw them, stacked near her recycling bin, unopened, the envelope edges untouched. Like even my pain didn't earn curiosity. Luca started showing up in her photos more, not just beside her, with her. Matching hotel robes, the same beach I took her to last spring, only now with cocktails and captions like, "Finally where I belong." He wore the watch I saved up for all summer, custom leather strap. I'd planned to give it to her on her birthday. She told me not to come that night, said her dad was hosting something formal, and it would be too tense with me there. I stayed home, lit a candle for her instead. Turns out, she blew out others with him. People talk about heartbreak like it's an explosion. But mine was a slow burial. Every smile she gave him, every event I wasn't part of, every sentence where my name used to live, replaced by he or them or someone special. I wasn't special anymore, just background. A character in her past. And yet, I couldn't leave, not fully. Because if I did, if I admitted she loved someone else, that meant everything we built was just scaffolding for another man's home. That meant love didn't conquer anything. That meant I was just a placeholder she decorated while waiting for something shinier. One evening, I stood outside her gallery. She didn't know I was there. Inside, they were unveiling her newest piece. Crowds in black attire, clinking glasses. The smell of money and curated compliments. I saw her, laughing, with him, and I saw me, reflected in the glass, still outside, still waiting. It happened on a Tuesday, the kind of day where everything feels fragile, the sky pale and cracked, like porcelain about to break. My phone buzzed at 2:14 a.m. Her name lit up the screen, Celeste. 3 words. "It's my dad." And a link to a news alert. Charles Lancaster hospitalized in Milan, sources confirm stroke. The article was cold, clinical. But her voice on the phone, it shook. Like the little girl hiding under the staircase again, waiting for the shouting to stop. She didn't have to ask, she never had to ask. By 4 a.m., I was booking a flight. I emptied my savings, called off work. Left a note on my boss's desk that read, "Family emergency," because she was my family, or so I believed. At the airport, I bought a single white rose. It felt symbolic, not too forward, not too romantic, just respectful. I thought maybe I'd hand it to her outside the hospital, let her cry into my chest like she used to. I pictured us sitting beside the hospital bed, fingers linked. Her head on my shoulder, silent strength, quiet love. I wanted to be the one she clung to when her world fell apart. I wanted to be hers, finally, without hesitation, without hiding. But then the call came. "John, don't come." Her voice was soft, almost apologetic, but not quite. "I'm already at the gate," I said, boarding pass in hand, heart in throat. "I know, I don't think it's a good time. He's not ready to meet you." "Meet me?" I blinked, confused. "I've met him. Celeste, I sat at your table last Thanksgiving." A pause, too long, too deliberate. "It's different now," she said, voice cracking. "He's vulnerable. It's complicated." Complicated. That word should come with a warning label. Because what she really meant was, it's not you, but it's not you because it's someone else now. I didn't board the plane, not because I agreed, but because I knew. Somewhere between her silence and my sacrifice, I had become a burden she no longer wanted to explain. Still, I waited, in that terminal. Gate 7B, for 12 hours. 12 hours of cheap airport coffee, 12 hours of pacing near the same window, watching planes come and go while mine remained unboarded. 12 hours of checking my phone, waiting for a message she never sent. And then it happened. I refreshed Instagram. Out of habit. Out of masochism. There she was, smiling. Eyes closed, champagne in hand. Luca beside her, cheek pressed too close. With the only man who makes me feel safe. Tagged, posted, public. I didn't zoom in. I didn't replay it. Once was enough to kill something. That night, I didn't cry. There was no scene, no scream, no cinematic fall to my knees. Just silence. And a white rose. Wilted now. I left it on the bench beside the boarding gate. A quiet surrender, a grave marker for a love that had begged for breath too long. I walked out with nothing but my phone and my shadow. No return flight, no explanation, no dignity left to salvage. Because here's the truth they never tell you: love shouldn't humiliate you, but sometimes the person you love most becomes the stage for your worst humiliation. And mine? She didn't even notice I was gone. I wrote it by hand, 6 pages, each line carved with the kind of precision that only comes when your chest is split open and you're trying to bleed cleanly. It wasn't a love letter, not the way people mean it. There were no hearts doodled in the margins, no metaphors about forever or soulmates. It was a confession of what I lost, of what she asked me to lose. Internships. I declined to stay close, family dinners I missed because she needed company through another anxiety spiral. Friends I let drift because she never liked the way they complicated me. Peace, most of all. I surrendered my peace the way soldiers throw themselves into trenches, believing the cause is noble, believing it will be remembered. She never saw the war, only the ribbons I wore to keep her comforted. I wrote the letter with trembling hands and the kind of silence that screams between every line. I didn't cross anything out, didn't rewrite, I let the hurt speak plainly for once. I don't hate you. That was how it began. But I wish I had. Hatred would have been easier to survive than this kind of soft death. I signed it without a name, because the boy who once belonged to her didn't exist anymore. Along with the letter, I included a photo. It was from that rooftop, the night she leaned into me under stars blurred by city haze, sparkler in one hand, my heart in the other. She was laughing, eyes closed, hair tossed by wind and chaos. It was the night she whispered, "Promise me you'll never leave." And I had. God help me, I had. I placed the photo carefully between the folded pages like a bookmark in a story I could no longer finish. Then I walked through the city, the letter in my coat pocket, fingers brushing it with every step. Like it was alive. Like it was the last thing I'd ever give her that still felt like truth. Her apartment complex hadn't changed, still ivy on the left wall, still that stubborn elevator that stuttered between floors. I slipped the envelope into her mailbox, no message, no call, just placed. Hoping the weight of it would whisper what I no longer had the strength to say. And then I left. I didn't check for a response, didn't wait by my phone, didn't walk past her street like a ghost with unfinished business. Or at least, that's what I told myself. Weeks passed, then months. The silence became routine, an ache I folded into my mornings. I stopped texting her when a song reminded me of us, stopped checking her page for new posts, stopped reading old conversations like they held answers to a question that never had one. I started painting again, little things, muted tones, abstract outlines. Nothing about her, at least, not directly. But somehow every canvas held a bit of that rooftop, a bit of the boy who kept his promise until it broke him. Then one day, mid-July, I was walking past her building by accident. A shortcut I'd forgotten I used to take when I wanted to feel close to her. There were string lights tangled across her balcony, laughter spilled down like confetti, music, people, the kind of crowd she used to say overwhelmed her. And then I saw it, by the door, used like a prop in someone's idea of a summer aesthetic. My letter. Torn open at the top, but not enough to see the words, crumpled at the corners, used as a wedge to keep her door from closing completely. My heart didn't crack, it stopped. Like it needed a moment to decide whether it was worth restarting. She hadn't read it. Not really. Maybe she glanced at the first line. Maybe she saw her name. Maybe she didn't even recognize my handwriting anymore. But I knew that envelope, knew the way I'd sealed it with trembling lips and a final breath. And there it was, keeping a door open that should have stayed shut. I didn't go up, didn't storm in, didn't reclaim it. I simply turned, and let her laughter fade behind me like a song I no longer remembered the lyrics to. That's the thing about closure, sometimes it doesn't come with an answer, sometimes it comes in the form of a letter no one bothered to read. That night, I went home and threw out every draft I had ever written for her. The poems, the playlists, the backup plans. and for the first time in a long time, I picked up a blank canvas. Not to paint her, but to paint me. Not the version who loved her, but the version who finally stopped waiting for someone who left him unopened. Her name was Lila, and she entered my life without fanfare, no grand gestures, no dramatic timing, just silence. The kind I had started to find sacred. It was late autumn, and the air had started to turn brittle. I'd wandered into my usual bookstore, a quiet little place tucked between a laundromat and a florist, the kind of store that smelled like old paper, tired hope, and wood polish. It was the only place that didn't ask anything from me, not even healing. I had sat there for hours most days, tucked between shelves of forgotten novels, reading stories about people who had the courage to start over. That's when I noticed her, 3 aisles down, crouched beside the poetry section. She had ink on her hands, smudged across her knuckles like she'd been fighting words all morning. A pen was stuck behind her ear, and her boots were untied. She was reading Neruda, whispering it, actually. I want to do with you what spring does with the cherry trees. And then, as if summoned by the verse, she looked up, right at me. Our first conversation was 5 words. You always sit there, huh? She didn't ask my name, she didn't offer hers, she just settled into the armchair next to mine, flipped open a blank notebook, and started to write. Not everything has to begin with thunder, some beginnings hum, and her presence felt like that, like rain on a rooftop you hadn't realized you missed. She didn't ask what I was running from, she didn't press about the heaviness in my eyes or why I kept thumbing the same dog-eared page. She just stayed, not to fix, not to judge, just to exist beside me. That kind of silence, it felt holy. Over the next few weeks, I started arriving earlier, not because I needed the books, but because I hoped she'd be there, legs crossed under her chair, always wearing those oversized sweaters with holes in the cuffs. We never talked much. Some days, she'd scribble notes with her tongue between her teeth. Other days, she'd pull out 2 cups of coffee without looking up and slide one toward me like it was our ritual. And it became one. Ink-stained mornings, shared silence, unspoken trust. I told myself I wasn't ready, that my heart was still covered in bruises with her name spelled out across each one. But Lila never asked me to be ready, she never asked me for anything. She just listened when I finally spoke. One rainy afternoon, I found her upstairs in the poetry alcove, eyes closed, head tilted against the window pane. Something about the soft gray light and her quiet breathing cracked something open in me. I wrote a letter, I said, voice barely louder than the falling rain. She opened her eyes but didn't speak. I poured everything into it, 6 pages, folded each one like a wound, left it in her mailbox. Lila didn't flinch. And? She never read it, I whispered. I saw it months later, torn open, used to wedge her door open during a party. Lila nodded, as if she understood without needing to dissect the ache. Then, after a beat, she said softly, maybe that letter wasn't for her, maybe it was for the version of you that still needed to say goodbye. And just like that, I felt seen in a way I didn't know I'd needed. With her, I didn't have to explain the empty spaces. She filled them quietly, with coffee, with notes she left tucked between pages of the books I read. One just said, even broken things can hold light. Another, you don't owe anyone your ruin. She didn't ask me to love her, but she made me want to try again, not with her, with myself. She didn't stand in front of my pain, she stood beside it. The first time she touched me, it wasn't a kiss, it wasn't some grand embrace under a dramatic sky. We were in the aisle where they kept used philosophy books. She reached for a title, something about suffering, and her hand brushed mine. She didn't pull away, and neither did I. Instead, she let her fingers rest there, warm, still, present. I looked at her, and she smiled, not the smile of someone falling, the smile of someone waiting, without expectation, without urgency. It didn't feel like fireworks, it felt like a soft lamp turning on in a dark room. I never told her everything, she never asked. But day by day, she gave me pieces of myself back, not all at once, just enough to feel real again. We never promised forever, we never had to. Because what she gave me wasn't romance dressed in performance, it was mercy, quiet, unshakable mercy. And in a world full of people who leave, she was the first who ever waited. It arrived like a ghost. No knock, no warning, just a sudden, chilling presence in my inbox at 2:03 a.m. Subject: Mr. Lancaster's funeral. Private ceremony. Sender: Celeste. No greeting, no apology, no mention of the year of silence, or the letter she never opened. Just this: I know you probably hate me, but if you ever loved me, please come, even if just for this. 7 sentences, not even a full plea, just a soft gasp of guilt typed through white space and regret. I read it, then reread it. Then just stared, at her name, at the subject line, at the way even in grief, she could be so measured. The woman who once made me believe in rooftops and forever. Now asking for a single afternoon. I didn't answer, I couldn't. Instead, I sat on the edge of my bed with the glow of the screen lighting the dark circles beneath my eyes, hands clenched like maybe holding still could keep something inside me from breaking again. Lila found me like that. She had fallen asleep earlier, curled up under the blanket she always brought when she stayed over. Soft, threadbare, the color of storm clouds. When she stirred awake, she didn't ask right away, she just moved toward me, silent, half asleep, then froze when she saw the screen. Her eyes scanned the email, she didn't need to ask. She simply whispered, "You don't owe her anything." It wasn't bitter, it wasn't fearful, it was said the way people speak when they love you, gently, but with backbone. I didn't respond at first, because I knew she was right. I owed Celeste nothing. But pain doesn't listen. To logic, it doesn't tally kindness or betrayal, it just lingers, waiting to be acknowledged one final time. So all I said was, "I know." And still, I held that invitation like a wound, clutched it in my fist until I fell asleep on the couch, the email still glowing on my laptop screen. By morning, I'd decided. Not because I forgave her, not because I wanted to see her again, but because sometimes, grief writes its own terms, and I needed to close the chapter where I was still the boy who once stood outside her life, waiting to be invited in. Even if now, the invitation was for death. The day of the funeral, the sky didn't mourn. No rain, no storm, just dry heat, like the sun couldn't be bothered to dim itself for a man who'd cast such a long shadow. I wore black, pressed shirt, clean shoes, no tie. But my hands, they trembled the entire train ride there. Lila didn't come, she didn't need to ask. When I turned to her that morning, unsure, she just said, "Go, but don't let it pull you back." Then she kissed my cheek, and her silence said everything her voice didn't. The cemetery was small, private, cold in a way that had nothing to do with weather. There were no news cameras, no grand speeches, just a handful of faces too proud to cry in public. And her. Celeste. Standing like a statue carved from guilt and grief. A black dress. Hair tied back. No makeup. But even stripped bare, she looked unreal. Like a memory too stubborn to fade. When our eyes met, she blinked, once, slowly. As if unsure whether I was real, or just one more ghost she'd summoned with too many regrets. She didn't smile, didn't move. And neither did I. The priest began to speak. Soft words, verses about legacy, power, family. But none of them felt human. None of them mentioned love, and I wondered if anyone there truly mourned Charles Lancaster, or if they simply feared his absence. As the final prayer ended, Celeste stepped forward to lay a rose on the casket. She faltered, just for a moment. Her knees buckled slightly, barely perceptible, unless you had once memorized the way she carried weight she refused to name. No one moved, no one caught her, until I did. Without thinking, I stepped forward, caught her elbow, held it just long enough for her to find balance. And in that split second, she looked up at me with something that wasn't gratitude, it was something older, something like grief wearing the mask of what-ifs. She didn't speak, but her eyes whispered, "I didn't know how to keep you, but I never forgot you." When the casket finally descended into the earth, she turned to me and said the only words we'd exchanged in a year, "Thank you, for coming." I nodded, because there was nothing left to say that wouldn't reopen wounds I'd already buried. She didn't ask how I'd been, didn't ask who I'd become, didn't ask if I'd moved on. And maybe that was mercy, because if she had, she would have seen Lila's name on the tip of my tongue. I left before the reception, before the second round of tears, and the toasts, and the quiet lies people tell about the dead. As I walked back through the wrought iron gate, the sun hit my face in a way that made me close my eyes. And for the first time in a long time, I felt the warmth of being seen, not by her, but by the version of me that finally knew when to walk away. I didn't bring red. Red was too romantic, too loud, too full of things I no longer believed in: promises, passion, second chances dressed in silk and fire. I brought a white rose, clean, quiet, meant for peace, not passion, meant for endings, not beginnings. White doesn't beg to be noticed, it just is, like silence, like grief, like truth. I held it in my hand the way I used to hold her when she was too tired to cry, not too tight, just enough to remind myself it was real. The car slowed outside the cemetery gates, old iron wrapped in ivy, the kind of gate that groaned when it opened, like even it mourned. The sky was pale, not quite gray, not quite blue, one of those in-between days, like the world couldn't decide if it wanted to cry or pretend nothing had happened. I stepped out, adjusting the collar of my black coat. The white rose looked stark against the fabric, a single contrast, like I had walked in carrying my own quiet protest. There were already people there. Rows of them, dressed in black designer suits and the kind of sunglasses made to hide more calculation than sorrow. Her world, all polished masks and curated grief. And then I saw her. Celeste. Hair swept into a low knot, the same way she wore it the night she left my apartment for just a week and never came back. She stood beside the casket, small but composed, a shadow wrapped in silk. Her hands clutched a tissue that hadn't caught a single tear. But when our eyes met, really met, she inhaled like someone surfacing after staying underwater far too long. Her lips parted, not to speak, just to breathe. And for a moment, the world held still. The whispers started before I even reached the front row. "He came? Isn't that after everything?" I didn't respond, didn't need to. Let them talk, let them wonder. This wasn't for them, this wasn't even for her. This was for the version of me who had once loved her so loudly, he forgot to love himself. She was alone, not just figuratively, literally. No Luca, no arm slung across her waist, no perfectly posed comfort beside her. The man she said made her feel safe, the one in the champagne posts, the rooftop stories, the whispered confessions that were never meant for me, he wasn't there, and maybe he never had been, because safety isn't a man who disappears when grief arrives. Safety stays, even when it's uncomfortable, even when you've burned every bridge between you. She took a step toward me, just one, but it was enough. Tears shimmered in her eyes, not the kind that fall freely, but the kind that live there, suspended, waiting for permission to let go. Her lips moved, not quite speaking, a silent please. She reached out, fingers trembling like they remembered the shape of mine, like muscle memory hadn't caught up with the truth yet. But I didn't move, not forward, not back. I just looked at her, really looked, at the girl who used to laugh with her whole body, at the woman who used that laughter like a shield, at the stranger who taught me the difference between love and longing. And in my hand, the white rose pulsed like a heartbeat. I stepped closer. Not for her, for me. Then, slowly, I knelt beside the casket and laid the rose down. No words, no prayers, just a gesture. White against polished wood, truth against legacy. I stood, brushing off my coat, and turned to leave. That's when I heard her whisper behind me, so soft, it might have been imagined. "John." But I didn't stop, didn't look back. Because this time, I wasn't the one who owed answers. This time, I wasn't waiting. As I passed through the cemetery gates again, the wind shifted. Cool, clean, like something old had finally been released. And in that moment, I realized, some goodbyes are loud, some are begged for. But the most powerful ones are the ones that don't need to be spoken at all. The ceremony had ended, but grief lingered in the corners like perfume no one wanted to wear. The guests were already drifting, white-gloved hands reaching for canapes they didn't want, murmured condolences exchanged like currency. The air tasted of polished stone, of wilted flowers, of unspoken judgment. I was halfway to the gate when I heard her voice, soft, frayed, like fabric pulled too tight over a wound. "John," she called. I didn't stop, not until the second part. "Please. Just until it's over." I can't do this alone. I turned then. Slowly. No theatrics. Just a man standing in the ashes of what he once built with both hands. She stood a few paces behind me, the wind catching strands of her hair and lifting them like whispers. Her eyes were red-rimmed now. Real tears. Not the staged kind, not the carefully timed performance of grief. But I'd seen her cry before. At midnight, when no one else could hold her. At 4 a.m., when her father's threat sent her spiraling. I had held her through all those nights. Now she asked me to stay for one more. But hadn't she already chosen to do this alone? When she left me unread, when she let another man occupy the pages we wrote together. When she stood beside him, smiling, while I turned invisible. I can't do this alone, she repeated, voice trembling. But she had. She had buried our love by herself. Folded it neatly in silence and tucked it behind gallery openings and rooftop kisses with a man who never stayed when it mattered. Her pain wasn't mine to carry anymore, and for once, I didn't try to shoulder it. I looked at her, really looked. She was still beautiful, still the girl who once danced barefoot in my apartment, tracing dreams onto fogged windows. Still the one I would have set the world on fire for. But some people only know how to love you when you're burning. I said nothing. Because sometimes silence is the only language betrayal understands. Words would have softened it, would have given her something to wrap herself in, something to misinterpret, to twist into another maybe. But silence, it's honest, it's a mirror. And in that moment, I gave her the one thing she never gave me, a clear answer. I turned. Not cruelly, not coldly, just finally. Like turning the last page of a chapter that had long since ended. And beside me, like breath, like gravity, was Lila. She didn't say a word either, she just reached for my hand, not urgently, not as a claim, but as a choice. There was no question in her grip, no fear that I'd vanish at the first sign of history returning. She didn't need to ask if I was okay, she knew I wasn't, but she also knew I would be. Not because she would fix me, but because this time, I wasn't walking away alone. Behind us, Celeste didn't call again, didn't run, didn't beg. She just stood there, in the middle of that manicured graveyard, surrounded by suits and whispers and ghosts she couldn't outrun. And I realized then. The real funeral wasn't for her father. It was for the version of me who would have stayed, who would have waited, who would have broken himself into smaller and smaller pieces just to make her feel whole. That man was gone now. Buried not beneath marble, but beneath her silence. The wind picked up as we stepped through the cemetery gate. Lila's scarf whipped behind her like the tail of something untamed. She looked up at me, her gaze quiet but fierce, and I knew, without needing to say it, that she saw the full weight of what had just happened. She didn't ask for more, she never did, she simply walked beside me, not because I needed her to, but because she chose to, and that choice, it felt like the first real thing in a long, long time. Weeks passed, then came the headlines, no calls, no texts, just digital ink bleeding across the screens I no longer flinched at. Lancaster estate shock city, entire fortune donated to charity, heir left with nothing. Luxury engagement unravels after fraud allegations. The articles wrote themselves like poetic justice. Her father's iron empire, liquidated and given to causes he once sneered at. Her fiancé, ex-fiancé, vanished overnight, taking not just her trust but what little legacy her last name was supposed to guarantee. And Celeste, she was left with ashes, not just her father's, but the empire, the illusion, the circle of polished masks that used to orbit her. She started over, no more penthouses, no more silk gowns on magazine covers, just a small studio on the east side and occasional blog posts under a different name. I saw a photo once, someone had reposted it, blurry and untagged. She stood at a corner cafe, notebook in hand, no makeup, hair tied messily, staring out the window like she was waiting for something that wasn't coming. She looked real, for the first time. And yet, I didn't feel satisfaction. No twisted pleasure. No, I told you so, from the voice that once screamed for closure. Because revenge, real revenge, wasn't about winning. It was about no longer needing to. While her world fell apart, I was building mine. Not out of spite, out of silence, out of stillness. Lila and I opened a creative firm, 1 part design, 1 part gallery, all heart. We named it Half-Light, for the spaces between darkness and dawn, for the parts of us that had been broken and remade, not hidden, just softened. We didn't scream our success, we let it breathe, let it grow slowly, like trust, like healing. Our first exhibit opened on a Thursday night. The gallery was tucked inside a restored warehouse with brick walls and hanging Edison bulbs. People wandered in from the street, drawn by curiosity, by word of mouth, by something unspoken in the air. I watched them pass between the canvases, each one a piece of something I once held close: grief, betrayal, longing. But there was one painting I hadn't seen before. Lila had waited until that night to reveal it. It hung near the back, under soft white lighting, almost hidden, intimate. 2 hands, one, open, releasing a rose, the petals mid-fall, suspended between the moment of letting go and the ache that comes after. The other, reaching. Not clutching. Just receiving. Gentle, honest. The crowd called it poetic. Some said it was a metaphor for grace, others said it was about trust. No one really knew the truth. But I did. When the exhibit began to thin and only the quiet lingered, I found her by the painting. Lila. Still wee, airing her paint-splattered boots and that cardigan with the stitched cuffs. Her hair tied back the way she always did when she wanted to disappear into the background. She wasn't trying to be seen, but somehow, she always was. "You painted this," I said, voice low. She didn't deny it, didn't explain it. She just looked at me, eyes steady, voice like breath. "You deserved a different kind of love." I didn't reply, didn't have to. Because in that moment, I realized. She wasn't offering herself. She wasn't trying to fill a space. She was simply reminding me that sometimes, the most beautiful thing someone can do is stand beside your healing without needing to be its reason. And maybe that was love too. Not the crashing kind, but the kind that waits. The kind that doesn't dim your light, even if it glows differently than theirs. Outside, it began to rain, not loud, not cold, just soft enough to feel like something new was being washed clean. And as the drops tapped against the windows, I stared at that painting again, the falling rose, the waiting hand, and thought, maybe this was the story all along. Not the one where I was chosen late, but the one where I chose myself, finally. It rained today, but for once, it wasn't sad. No thunder, no chaos, just the kind of soft, silver rain that feels like a secret whispered between clouds and earth. The air smelled of petrichor, wet stone, green things coming alive again. I stood beneath the awning of our gallery, the wood above me creaking slightly with each new drop, and watched as the rain turned the sidewalk into a mirror. There was no weight in it, no grief folded into every droplet, just water, just sky finally letting go. Layla stepped beside me, 2 cups of coffee in hand, hers always too bitter, mine too sweet. She wore that navy coat again, the one with the sleeve stitched at the wrist where the thread had come loose. Her hair was damp near the temples, sticking to her skin in little curls. She didn't speak. She never rushed moments. She let silence stretch, trusting it wouldn't break. Then, slowly, she leaned in and kissed me. Under that creaking awning, with the rain soft against the tin roof. Not urgently, not as a question, just, soft, certain, like she wasn't asking to be loved. She already knew she was. It was the kind of kiss that didn't need to be earned, only returned. So I did. I kissed her the way I'd never kissed anyone, not Celeste, not even the memory of who I used to be. Because this wasn't desperation, this wasn't a goodbye dressed up as something tender, this was presence, this was peace, this was here. When we parted, her eyes met mine, and everything she'd never asked for was there: patience, restraint, a kind of devotion that didn't need a spotlight to survive. I looked at the sky, water falling like quiet applause, and I thought about all the times I'd stood alone in the rain, all the times it mirrored my grief, washing down my back like punishment for loving wrong. I thought about funerals, how people always say rain means the sky is mourning too. But love, real love, doesn't deserve storms, it deserves sun, and soil, and slow-growing things, it deserves warmth, and waiting, and someone who chooses you without needing to be convinced. I used to beg for love. Used to write letters that never got opened. Used to chase after someone who confused attention with affection, passion with performance. I used to think that if I gave enough, I would finally be enough. But standing there with Lila, coffee cooling in our hands, lips still tasting, like rain and resolve, I realized something. I didn't have to beg anymore, because she already had, quietly, without spectacle, without condition. She waited in the bookstore, she waited in silence, she waited beside pain without asking it to hurry up and heal. And when the time came, she didn't run toward me like a victory, she walked with me like a partner. People passed by the gallery, umbrellas blooming like petals. Some glanced at us, some didn't. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel like watching it. Didn't feel like a supporting role in someone else's highlight reel. I felt real, rooted, seen. Not as someone's regret, not as someone's backup plan, but as someone who chose, and was chosen back. The rain kept falling. But inside me, it stopped. That lifelong storm, the one I carried through airports and gallery openings, through letters and funerals and too many nights with unanswered questions, finally cleared. Lila squeezed my hand. No words, she didn't need them, and neither did I. Because for the first time, there was nothing left to explain, no one left to prove anything to, just us. And the kind of love that grows in quiet places. The kind that stays even after the rain.